Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. I will explain more at the end of this video. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. Frank Vitkovic was born on the 7th of September 1965. His father Drago was originally from Croatia, at that time it was called Yugoslavia, and his mother Liliana had moved to Australia from Italy. Frank grew up in West Preston, a quiet suburb approximately 10 kilometres north of Melbourne. He lived with his parents and sister Millie, who was 3 years older than him. He was an intelligent child who gained good grades in school. When he started primary school, he met a boy by the name of Con Margelis, who would ultimately become one of his closest friends. Whilst he maintained good grades, Frank did not enjoy his time at school. An incident where a teacher would not allow him to leave during maths resulted in him wetting himself, which led to other children teasing him relentlessly. It is understood that there was a specific incident when he was quite young that led to even more bullying. When he was undressed in the school changing room, some other boys noticed that he had not been circumcised, something that was far more common in Australia in the 1970s than it is today. After this, he was constantly mocked for being different, and he started to become increasingly isolated. He only had a handful of friends other than Con, who would describe him as a generally good guy who was a bit too intense at times. Both Frank and Con attended the Redden Catholic College in Preston. They both became very keen tennis players and would often compete and play both singles and doubles at St Raphael's Tennis Club. Other club members recall that Frank was a good player who at one point won their singles championship. However, he was an extremely poor loser who was prone to tantrums when things didn't go his way. At some point in 1984, when out jogging, Frank sustained an injury to his knee which needed surgery to fix. Unfortunately, the surgery was unsuccessful and resulted in Frank being in constant pain and unable to play tennis. Con, who was now the better tennis player, would tease Frank about this and the fact that the lack of exercise had caused Frank to gain some weight. In 1984, Frank started studying at the University of Melbourne Law School. Despite his intelligence, he struggled with his studies and university life as a whole. One of the essays that he wrote during this time was so off topic and potentially violent that his lecturer became concerned for his well-being. Frank was encouraged to see the university counsellor and attended a couple of appointments where he discussed his feelings at length. It is believed that he had started having suicidal thoughts during this period. By 1987, Frank had to drop out of his university course due to unsatisfactory progress. His parents remained hopeful that he would return to his studies the following year. At 22, Frank was living in the family home in May Street, Preston, with his parents and older sister. He didn't have any real friends, had never had a romantic relationship, and had taken a job as a casual manual labourer. On 17th of September 1987, Frank legally obtained a shooter's licence. This was almost 10 years prior to Australia's gun laws being changed. When Frank was asked why he wanted the licence, he stated that he had a desire to go hunting. In early October 1987, he purchased a US M1 semi-automatic carbine on lay-by. That is where a deposit is paid to reserve an item, but it can only be collected once fully paid for. He completed payment for the gun on the 21st of October 1987 and was therefore allowed to take it home, where he set about making illegal modifications to the weapon, removing the barrel and the handle. Tuesday, 8th of December 1987 was a bright sunny day in Melbourne, with many busy at work and preparing for Christmas. Just after 4 p.m. that day, Frank walked into the building at 191 Queen Street in Melbourne. This 18-storey office block was situated in the heart of Melbourne's busy central business district and was the location of the Australia post offices. Despite the heat, Frank was wearing an army-style jacket. He was also carrying a brown paper bag. Frank was angry at how he perceived the world had treated him and how others had behaved towards him. He had become increasingly agitated and depressed, and all of these emotions were focused on getting Con to pay for the betrayal of their friendship. Con Margellis, Frank's childhood friend, worked on the 5th floor at 191 Queen Street in the offices of the Telecom Employees Credit Corporation. At 4:17 p.m, Frank entered these 5th floor offices and stood patiently in line. When he was called to the counter, he asked to speak to Con. A female employee went to tell Con that he had a visitor. He came out and greeted Frank happily. Frank pulled the sawed-off shotgun from his bag and took aim at Con, but the gun jammed, giving Con a small window of opportunity to duck for cover. Frank managed to reload the gun and took aim at one of Con's colleagues, Judy Morris. Judy was 19 years old and had only been working at the office for around 9 months, but is already in line for promotion. She was the eldest of 3 children and was in the process of planning her wedding. She died instantly. At 4:22 p.m, an employee managed to press an alarm to alert the police. Con managed to run away and find a hiding place in the women's toilets, where he quietly remained. Frank, frustrated with not being able to find Con, decided to continue with his murderous plan and went hunting for more victims. He took the elevator to the 12th floor, where the Australia Post Office was based. The offices had a security door, and unaware of what had happened 7 floors below, Frank was buzzed in. Once inside, he shot and killed 20-year-old Julie McBean. Frank then walked into a partitioned office where 29-year-old David Spencer was hiding. Frank killed him with a single shot. David's partner, Sue Welfare, survived the shooting and was left to bring up their 2 young children alone. Frank left the office and noticed 18-year-old Nancy Avignon hiding under her desk. He fired 2 shots at her from a distance of a few meters. Both shots hit Nancy. Frank then walked up to the seriously injured young woman and shot her in the head at close range. He then took the fire escape down to the 11th floor, shooting indiscriminately as he went. People tried to run or hide wherever they could. As Frank arrived on the 11th floor, he saw 38-year-old Michael Maguire, a married father of 3 who had been about to leave work when the shooting started. Michael saw Frank approaching him and ran into an office to hide, but Frank had already seen him. He followed him, firing once from a distance and then shot him a second time in the head at very close range. Frank continued to walk around the 11th floor, shouting obscenities and firing randomly. 57-year-old Donald McElroy was shot, falling back against one of the windows, smashing it. Donald was screaming in pain, so Frank turned and shot him again in a bid to silence him. Leaving Donald for dead, Frank saw 38-year-old Marion Van Eyck, killing her instantly with a shot to the head. 2 other women, 28-year-olds Catherine Dowling and Rosemary Spiteri, were also seen hiding under a desk together. Frank shot them both. Catherine died, Rosemary survived. Frank then saw 36-year-old Frank Carmody. Frank Carmody went into survival mode and lunged towards Frank. As they fought over the gun, Frank shot Frank Carmody and left him bleeding on the floor. Frank then turned the gun on 32-year-old Rodney Brown. Rod survived this attack, but later died in hospital. Convinced that he was the next to be shot, another worker, Tony Joyer, jumped on Frank, and the 2 of them fell to the floor next to where Frank Carmody was lying. Despite having been shot, Frank Carmody helped Tony to wrestle the gun away from Frank. They passed it to a female co-worker, believed to be Rosemary Spiteri, who had also been shot. She ran and hid it in the office refrigerator. With the help of another 2 employees, Claire Chalkley and Donald McElroy, who had already been shot twice, they managed to restrain Frank. Now without a gun, Frank could not complete his murder-suicide mission. 4 people were trying to restrain him, 2 of whom were seriously injured, but he crawled towards the broken window. The 4 of them tried to hold him back, but Frank was determined to end his life. He managed to crawl most of the way out of the window, slicing his stomach on broken glass as he went. Bleeding profusely, he kicked out at Tony, who was holding his ankles. Tony, who was a much smaller man than Frank, could not hold on, and Frank fell 11 floors to his death. Police, who had by now surrounded the building, were initially unaware that this was the lone gunman dead at their feet. The official time of death was 4:34 p.m, just 17 minutes after Frank had walked into the 5th floor offices of the Telecom Employees Credit Corporation. It was discovered that Frank had taken over 300 rounds of bullets with him, of which he had fired around 100 before falling to his death. If his gun hadn't repeatedly jammed and measures had not been taken to overpower him, the death toll could have been far higher. It was estimated that there were between 850 and 1,000 people in the building at the time of the attack. Ironically, it was the changes that Frank himself made to the gun that made it far less effective. When police searched Frank's room at his parents' house, they found a diary that he had been completing for many years. It revealed an isolated man who stewed over past wrongs, a man who had developed such a strong feeling that he had been marginalised by society that it affected every area of his life. He had developed an obsessional need for revenge as a result. The diary was compared by some to a blueprint for the evolution of a spree shooter. It also contained a note that Frank had written to his parents stating that he could no longer live with his anger, violent impulses and tormented thoughts. Con Margelis sustained no physical injury in the attack. Frank Carmody and Tony Joya both received a Star of Courage Bravery Award for disarming the killer. Claire Chalkley and Donald McElroy also received commendations for bravery. The impact of those 17 minutes on 8th of December 1987 have been huge. 8 innocent people lost their lives and 9 families lost their loved ones. 17 people were injured, many of those seriously. Those who survived, irrespective of whether they sustained physical injuries, had to deal with the life-altering mental trauma of being involved in a mass shooting event, and many were left with survivor's guilt. That concludes the story of Frank Vitkovic. My heart goes out to all the victims on this one. I've also put a slide of everyone's name, just in case my pronunciation was wrong. Please add down any comments down below. I originally had this planned to release on day 2, but because of the content, there were very, very limited adverts. More realistically, no adverts. I still wanted to show this as I tried to write it about the victims, and I also wanted to show it to you as a thank you for your support. Also, Mortis Media and Briefcase, thank you for sharing the videos and also for helping me with the rebrand. It's a new look and it really has been well received by people, so thanks for your help. And also to thank Abby Roberts for the brilliant new introduction and background music. Her YouTube channel is in the video description, along with links to the music if you wanted to check those out and subscribe. Thank you so much for all your support during this recent campaign. The only place where I've really got behind on is comments. I've had over 6,000 comments, which is just what I request nearly every time I say please comment down below. So it really does mean a lot, but I apologise that I'm a little bit behind. However, I will try and catch up and respond to your comments. Thank you once again for listening to The Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. I 100% promise you there will not be a video tomorrow. I'll see you Wednesday. Goodbye.